Okay, well, our first lecture here for the new semester, we are looking at the development of the Old West. Looking at issues of settlement, land use, and clashes between settlers and Native Americans. Look at the Plains Indian Wars, look at the Federal Reservation Policy, the Dawes Severalty Act, the Indian Reorganization Acts. There's some legislation helping the settlers come out of the West. The Homestead Act, the Timber Culture Act, the Desert Land Act, the Newlands Act, the Oklahoma Land Rush. Any questions, any of those? Major terms of the day. When we look at the settlement of the United States, we see a lot of progress being made in a relatively short time. Some of the largest, most important cities in the world built in just a very short time. I think some of the most important cities in the United States may be 100, 200 years old, versus the oldest cities in Europe are maybe thousands of years old. There's a rush of immigration, settlement into the United States, but with everything, there is a cost. Sometimes the cost is bearable, sometimes it is not. With anything, though, there's going to be a cost. Say, for example, people leaving Europe. They were leaving what they knew and what was comfortable to them behind. They're coming to a strange land they didn't know anything about. They might have become successful in the United States. They might not have. You had to weigh what the cost would be, in addition to the actual danger of crossing the Atlantic. And then settlement. You have the result being a lot of infrastructure, a lot of farming, a lot of mining, railroads, but the cost is who is living there first? Native Americans. And they were just pushed out of the way in awful, horrible ways. See, what keep in mind here when we study history is we're also studying human nature. Human beings are not 100% bad or not 100% good. We all fall somewhere in between. Some more to one extent than the other. Ask people of the United States in 1880 what was happening to Native Americans, they would have felt perfectly justified. Ask them 100 years later, completely different opinion. But the fact was that in the years after the Civil War, millions of settlers were streaming out to the West. So all sorts of ways and means that was happening, and all sorts of results behind that. Some found success in the West, some found disaster, and for many different reasons on both ends of the scale. We open with 1876. At this point, is a landmark in the history. This is the nation's centennial. The nation celebrating a century of independence. Time of great celebration in America. The nation's industrial and global influence is growing steadily. Nations of peace, the wounds of the late Civil War were slowly fading, Reconstruction coming to an end. Essentially, America is closing a page on Civil War, the divisions and disasters of the previous decade, and looking forward to what the future held, wanting to move ahead. In fact, with the official Centennial Celebration Committees, there are both Union and Confederate veterans involved in the planning the nation's celebration. That's how quickly the country is coming together. But The West was offering unlimited possibilities to the hardy souls who were willing to trek across the Great Plains. Now, the United States, as it was formed, basically, it was the British colonies on the Atlantic coast. So, from the perspective of the United States, as it's moving west, as it expands, it is growing west. Of course, it's running into other settlers that have been there before, the French and the Great Lakes region and the Mississippi River Valley, Spanish settlers moving up south from Mexico, and but also Native Americans. Now, one thing about American character overall is it's the belief in new possibilities, belief in new horizons. That overall throughout American history, it's desire to see what's over the next hill, desire to move, desire to start over and change your life from whatever your circumstances might have been previously. The immigrant wanting to start a new life in America, the slave wanting to escape freedom, the settler wanting to move out west, start a new farm and a new life. Miner hoping to strike it rich and change the trajectory of his life. It's the time of the great inventors, those wanting to, not looking for a physical frontier to conquer, but a mental frontier. But with the West, it was entirely a physical frontier. Except there's no evidence of any European contact or any Anglo-American European technology, culture. Essentially, it's what the settlers would be bringing with them from the West, from the East. But of course, the myth came to be developed over time, though, that it's all rugged individualism. It's all just one man against the elements, building a farm by his own two hands, no one helping him. But a little further, the truth is actually a little bit more complicated. Yeah, we all know the story. The guy was born in the log cabin he built by himself. Like I said, the multimillionaire said he did it all by himself. Well, if we dig a little further, a little deeper into those lives, into our lives, realize that we never do anything alone. What we accomplish, what we push through and do, we have help along the way. Think of the teachers who teach us. Think of people who offer us a kind word of encouragement here and there. Like say you're going to a community college or a state college or university that is subsidized by the taxpayers of that state. If you're on some kind of scholarship or some kind of federal aid, that's somebody helping put up money. Yes, you did the hard work, a lot of it, but there was somebody helping you behind the scenes in all sorts of subtle ways. Now, some of the West, it's financed by Eastern capital, bankers and investors back east. The West in the 1870s and 1880s came the promised land for an anxious population. And for long, where there's nothing, except miles and miles, but nothing but miles and miles, you have railroads, telegraph lines, international trade touching the West, bringing in more settlers and more development. In 1867, the famous newspaper editor Horace Greeley of the New York Herald Tribune wrote an editorial telling the unemployed of New York City to go west. Greeley had always been pushing for Americans to push out westward. But telling the unemployed, quote, "If you strike off into the broad, free West to make yourself a farm from Uncle Sam's generous domain, you'll crowd nobody, starve nobody, and neither you nor your children need ever more beg for something to do." Now the key here is Uncle Sam's generous domain, which means federally owned land. See, the U.S. government owned all that land out west. Louisiana Purchase and subsequent treaties and other land purchases. But the government didn't want to just sit on it here and just stare at it and say, oh, look what I've got. They wanted people to come out and settle on it. So people began moving westward, and as a result, the frontier line started moving westward also. Frontier, that's an important idea in the development of America. Frontier. Like I said, for most of us, it brings up very romantic and adventurous images of moving off into some strange unknown land, but the U.S. Census Bureau had an official definition area. An area where there's averages less than one person per square mile. Less than one person per square mile. And from the first census in 1790 on forward, there's a very discernible frontier line. An area that on one side of the line had more than one person per square mile, and the other side had less than one person per square mile. And each subsequent census, 1790, 1800, 1810, 1820, that line moved further and further west. Well, after the California Gold Rush, the 1850 census, and all of a sudden you start noticing a second frontier line emerging on the California coast, moving inward, moving eastward. What they start having, though, is this clear frontier line, which had existed up to this point. It's kind of a little bit more complicated. You have the second frontier line of California and the Pacific coast moving inward. And also start having settlement in the Great Basin area, the Great Salt Lake region, the Red River area of New Mexico. Finally, by 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau reported there was no longer any discernible frontier line in the United States. That is, they couldn't have one clear line stating that one side of the line settled, the other side of the line unsettled. That marked a profound psychological change for the United States. There was no more frontier. It's not out west. So Americans had to shift their approach to what that new horizon would be. In the 1870s and 1880s, all the great territories of the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains started filling in. The Dakotas, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Montana. By 1912, all the lower states of the lower 48 states are filled in. Here on page 563 in the book, you see a map of the United States that was forming at the time. Now what's happening, though, is federal investment is helping facilitate the settlement, financing railroad construction, providing land, financing military protection of the frontier, bring law enforcement to settlement communities and the territories. Okay, see, look what's happening. You have some open territory. They don't have organized cities, organized counties yet. So, who's going to do the law enforcement? Who's going to bring all the rustlers and the gunfighters to justice? U.S. Marshals, federal agents. So Wyatt Earp and those guys, they were U.S. Marshals, Pat Masterson. They were basically the only law enforcement on the frontier. In fact, at Fort Smith, which was basically the borderline between Arkansas and the Indian Territory, there was the only federal judge there for hundreds of miles. You had a lot of U.S. Marshals being ordered by federal judges to go out and deliver warrants. That's why they're putting up the U.S. Marshals Museum there, Fort Smith. But railroad construction. The U.S. government was giving millions of acres of land to the railroads just go out and build railroads. Which is a huge boon for railroads because the land they're getting out for railroads, you got your railroad here. Very narrow rail, but the land they're given, the frontage is like thousands of acres on either side. Now, of course, the railroads aren't just going to give back that land the federal government gave to them. What they do is they sell it, rent it out to farmers. In addition to that, federal government, state governments giving out grants to railroads to build. Trying to build infrastructure, railroads meant industry, commerce, trade, meant a lot of money. The railroads knew it, they're making a lot of money, and they're lobbying Congress and the state legislatures to give them all this free land, give them all these grants. By lobby, I mean either going in and convincing them or something under the table. Open bribery was a problem at this time. But not only land for the railroads, but land for the settlers as well. Military protection for the frontier. Someday, basically, to protect the settlers, basically keep the settlers and the Native Americans away from each other. Essentially, what would happen is the U.S. government comes in, tells the Native American tribes that these are the new borders, and whether they agree with them or not, all of a sudden, tribes find that their territorial claims are limited, but settlers start coming onto the land. They start fighting with each other, tribes and the settlers. The U.S. Army comes in, fights the tribes lose, lines are redrawn into smaller and smaller and smaller areas. Nearly every treaty the U.S. government made with the tribes is broken. So much to the point that even to this day there are still cases in federal courts over tribal land claims. But the railroads, the pioneer trails and so forth, settlers came out. Some found land, some found fame and fortune, some didn't. What we start noticing, though, is as settlers moving west was the climate is changing as well. And that's another factor in how the West is settled. It's a very different climate. Now in the east, rainfall is very plentiful. And so look, we are here in southern Arkansas. We're in the middle of a forest. You go all the way back to the Atlantic coast the same way, heavily forested. But start moving further west from here, start noticing it starts changing. Just drive down I-40 from West Memphis to Fort Smith. Notice how the terrain changes. Basically starting from a swamp in the middle of a forest, West Memphis. By the time you're in Fort Smith, it's a lot drier. The elevation's higher. Not as many trees. Moving to Oklahoma, open plains. We'll do the same thing on the east side of Dallas, heavily forested, the Piney Woods area of East Texas. Right west of Fort Worth, open rolling plains, very few trees. Because you basically move along I-35, you have a 30-inch rainfall line. Essentially, for eastern-style farming, the kind of farming you'd have in this area back further east, you need about 30 inches of precipitation per year. Inches. And most of the Great Plains lies west of this line. So if you move further west in the United States, it's drier and drier and drier. Find areas of New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, desert. Less than 8 inches of precipitation a year. As you get back over the Rocky Mountains, back to the west side. So, this meant having to make some dramatic changes in the style of farming they're doing. The type of land that's being given out. So, either they had to go to ranching, which required less rainfall, start growing different types of crops, or move to irrigation. So irrigation became a lifeline for the West. Again, mostly facilitated by the U.S. government. The U.S. Geological Survey sent out geologists across the entire West to map the areas where irrigation lines could be built, where reservoirs could be built as well. Because suppose you're here along on this riverbank here. Okay, you've got your farm here. Now you can either have a big spread for grazing or a small spread for farming, but you have to have access to the water, so let's start building irrigation lines, which provided that needed water for farmers. But again, irrigation, you have to remember the basic farmer's rules. Water doesn't run uphill, payday's Friday. This irrigation can only go so far above the, can't go above the river line. Basically, you're drawing out water onto a flat plain. Can't move it up here into the mountains. Laws of gravity. Now it's 19th century technology. You had 20th century pumping mechanisms. You could do it. But you don't have that in 1880, 1890. Now, irrigation traditionally has been sponsored by state, national, individual, or corporate interests. It only affects a very small region of the West because you see here, water doesn't run uphill. Now, it's generally limited to the river valleys and the bench lands surrounding them, because these lands right here. So if these federal irrigation surveys taken out, you're able to start seeing where the most feasible areas to build irrigation would be. But you also have reservoirs being built. Basically what happened is they built a huge dam along a river and basically let the water all back in behind it. So before long you have this huge lake. Let's tell you how important reservoirs are to the West. In Texas and Oklahoma, all the lakes are man-made. Every one of them. Built by a reservoir system damming up one end of a river. That's why if you're ever driving by a lake and see a bunch of dead trees in the middle of it, that's how you know it's man-made.
You said Texas?
Oklahoma, yeah. Because what's happening, though, is when they're damming up a river, they're not going to go and cut down all the trees. They're just going to let it all flood in around it. So those two states, all the lakes are man-made. There were a couple of natural lakes in Texas, but they were so significantly altered by reservoirs. They aren't really natural much anymore. But don't really count as natural anymore. But all those lakes are man-made. And providing water for the cities and for the farmers. Like I said, thousands just in those two states. There are tens of thousands of reservoirs that have been built by the federal government all over the country. Most of them maintained by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But with the advent of pipelines, and you start moving water uphill, cities could draw millions of gallons of water from rivers over 100 miles away. Case in point, Las Vegas, Nevada. It's not on a river. But it draws its water from the Colorado River 100 miles away, making it a city of 250,000 people. Because of pipelines, you have these large cities out west can't exist. Phoenix, Arizona, Tucson, Arizona, both cities over 1 million people. Without pipelines, those cities could not exist. So if the water was cut off, those cities would disappear overnight. Irrigation, reservoirs, pipeline systems, making those cities possible. Of course, turn to the situation with the Native Americans again. The Anglo-American settlers are moving west and trying to settle on land people lived on for centuries, prepared to fight for the end and defend it. Native American tribes have lived, farmed, and hunted on the plains since antiquity. Now, some tribes fared better than others, depending on where they were, but we have to remember when talking about Native Americans is it's not just one tribe or one culture. Many different tribes, many different cultures, many different ways of living. Most tribes were actually sedentary. They lived in permanent villages. They were farmers. Tribes that lived in Arkansas before statehood, they were all farmers. Do you have a question? Tribes in Arizona, New Mexico, the Navajo, they were farmers. And they used irrigation techniques. Think of the totem pole cultures of the Pacific Northwest, farmers and hunters. You have a lot of tribes living in the Rocky Mountains. They're basically foragers, living off roots, nuts, berries, whatever they could find. But the image we see so often in movies, the nomadic tribes, those hooping and hollering war parties off of dusty plains, that's only one type of Native American group, the Plains Indians. That's one of the very few tribal groups that were nomadic. It's included dozens of tribes, the Kiowa, the Lakota, the Sioux, Cheyenne, and many others. But each of those tribes had their own language, own religious beliefs, and own way of living. Now, tribes of the high plains hunted buffalo to survive. Except the buffalo, these are everything that buffalo had to offer. Meat and skins for clothing, shelter, turn the bones into knives, the tendons into bowstrings, horns and hooves were boiled into glue. In fact, for many years, that's how you made glue, was horse hooves. That's why you get the bad nickname for the slow horse of the racetrack, glue maker. I kid you not. Buffalo chips dried out to be used for fuel. I'm not sure how this can make your food taste, but it can be used for fuel. And that was the key to living their life. They had followed herds of buffalo back and forth over the plains, migrating. And one time there were millions of buffalo, covering huge areas of the West. Now, the life of the Plains tribes undergone radical transformation in the previous few centuries. In the 1500s, they're introduced to the horse for the first time. Remember, horses aren't native to the Americas, native to the Old World. They're brought initially by the Spanish over when they were exploring the New World. Some of these horses got away. So then they bred, and before long there's this huge population explosion of horses. They start migrating northward. Southern Plains tribes encounter them first, Northern Plains tribes later. In fact, there's some tribes that didn't encounter the horse until the early 1700s. But when they did, horse changed their life forever. Tribes had never seen horse before, within a generation become expert horsemen. Their entire lives are centered around the horse. Horses, they use them, ride them into combat. They use them to transport their belongings from one campsite to the next. Like I said, just for a very short time, because of the horse, hunting all of a sudden is more plentiful. They have a standard of living they've never had before. Hunting became easier, changed the nature of warfare of the plains. Now, most Native Americans in this region formed tribes of several thousand members, but subdivided these into bands of about maybe 300 to 500 at any one time. So any one group you see are about 300 to 500 people. Basically, a traveling village is no bigger than North Platte or Strong or Huttig, just traveling back and forth across the west. The Comanches numbered no more than about 7,000. Now this is just an estimate. There are no census numbers available until they're forced on the reservations. But of the Comanches, of these 7,000, they subdivided themselves into 13 different bands, each with its own name. And those Comanches, among many others, are among the thousands of tribesmen who are chasing maybe 30 to 70 million buffalo. So what the federal government wants to do as they're moving out west, as the settlers moving out west, is they want to force the tribes into submission. Essentially, they want to end the way of life these nomadic tribes they've had for thousands of years and force them onto reservations. That had been the policy of the U.S. government since 1851. Basically, force these remaining tribes onto reservations. But here's the kicker. They're not going willingly. So the U.S. Army, the U.S. government figured there's only one way this is going to be possible. They had to starve them into submission. So the U.S. government started paying bounties for the hides of buffalo, paying people to go out and just kill as many buffalo as they could, just take the skins and leave the rest of everything out to rot in the open. While people riding west on the railroads, so a lot of these buffalo migration patterns were crisscrossing the railroads. People got out the rifles and shotguns and just start shooting at the buffaloes. They're crossing the plains, just target practice. Shoot them, leave them that they're dead in their tracks. So as a result of this mass hunting, by 1900, the buffalo number, once numbered in the tens of millions, is now down just to 1,000. Nearly driven into extinction. Tribes starved, had no choice but to go to the reservations, had no means, and had to fight. Now, clashes with the tribes are as early as the earliest European settlements. Leif Erikson came to Newfoundland in 1001. He was killed by Native American tribes living in Newfoundland. Encounters the earliest tribes in the New World, often very violent. In cases, the Europeans came as invaders, or were seen as invaders. So starting in 1831 with the Indian Removal Act, the official policy of the U.S. government became one of forcing tribes onto reservations, starting with the trail tiers and the removal of tribes from the southeast. They all moved to the Indian Territory, which is the present-day state of Oklahoma. Thousands of people were killed in the process of Trail of Tears, forcing them onto these reservations in the southeast. And so what more and more politicians of the frontier started pushing for was pushing all the tribes onto reservations. And see, in those days, in the West, you could get a great reputation as being an Indian fighter. One goes off, fights these battles, these different tribes. They had these interesting combinations of people who were often circuit rider preachers going from one church to the next, and Indian fighters. Church on Sunday and going out and shooting Indians the rest of the week. You get a great reputation for that. You had politicians in the frontier areas openly calling for the extermination of tribes. In 1838, the president of the Texas Republic, Murrayville Lamar, said in his inaugural address that the tribes of Texas must either be, in his words, expelled or exterminated, openly calling for genocide. There were a few people who said the tribes should be just left alone, but that view was far, far the minority. But there was a middle ground there, which said just reservations. Basically, don't kill them, just basically push them out of the way. Give them this land that's theirs, push them out of the way. Of course, the problem became, though, for these reservations was more and more settlers started realizing the land these tribes had was pretty good farmland. They wanted it. So they started stripping away this land that was given to them by the federal government more and more and more, and so the claims of the tribes, the reservations, get smaller and smaller and smaller. And while on these reservations, they're officially under the protection of the U.S. government, but what is happening is the tribes are being forced to assimilate to Anglo-American culture, to give up their tribal traditions, religion, language, and adopt Christianity as their religion, adopt the English language, give up their nomadic lifestyle, and become just regular, ordinary farmers. The cultures will be torn down to make way for the progress of Europeans. Chief Ravencloud in his Law of Sioux in 1870 said of the relations between whites and Native Americans, quote, "Made us many promises, but never kept but one. They promised to take our land, they took it." Now, by 1870, most of these tribes have been forced onto the reservations, scattered across the West. A lot of settlers believed the tribes couldn't be reasoned with. But federal policy leaned more and more towards this policy of forced assimilation. Of course, along the way, you have all sorts of massacres. For example, 1864. The Sand Creek Massacre. Should be a map here. Here at page 577. Then the Colorado Territory in 1864. That was Colorado was experiencing a mining boom. People discovered a bunch of silver in the mountains of Colorado, flooding into the area, trying to make their fortune. The federal government's encouraging this because it needed money for the Civil War happening. The thing is, there's tribes living in these mountains, and two sides start clashing, or fighting over competing claims. And this long war breaks out between the tribes of the area and the Colorado militia. fighting back and forth. It's mostly a Cheyenne, I believe. By 1864, they're pretty much just beaten in submission. They don't have most of the men of fighting age are gone. All I have left is the old men, the women, and the children. But they're told by the U.S. government, though, if they flew the American flag in the middle of their camp, that basically was a flag of truce. Basically meant you're accepting U.S. authority. So, tribal leaders decided to go to this creek bed in southeastern Colorado, an area called Sand Creek, fly the flag of truce, and wait for the U.S. government to show up, and they begin negotiating what their fate would be. Essentially, they're surrendering, just waiting for the terms to be drawn up. So they have no fight left, very few weapons of any type. And so what happens is the Colorado militia decides, well, all these Indians are suddenly massing on Sand Creek. They have to be preparing for attack, so they're getting ready to wipe them all out. So they rode in, even though they saw the American flag flying as a flag of truce. And although there was no resistance by the tribes, the Colorado militia rode in, shot and killed 200 women and children. In some cases, they had these little kids, they took it by the rifle and bashed their heads in. These people under flag of truce. And you have stories like this all up and down the frontier. You have the battles going back and forth. In 1867, into the Sioux War, 2 years earlier between the Sioux and the gold miners, Montana, federal commissioners proposed that 2 areas be created to hold all the Plains Indians. These 2 reservations would be the Black Hills Reservation in what's now South Dakota. At that time, simply the Dakota Territory. Be holding 54,000 Native Americans from tribes in the north. All the tribes in the southern plains would go to the Indian Territory. Oklahoma. And they'd hold 86,000. Of course, the problem is the tribes in the southeast were clearly given a territory that was to belong just to them. The federal government subdivides it for these new tribes that are being forced onto off the plains and into reservations. Well, both these areas had a very rough land. There's some good land in Oklahoma, but there's also some very rough land. Black Hills especially. And the lands are further subdivided when settlers began to press for opening these lands. That is, whatever good lands were available on these reservations, settlers demanded the federal government give to them, take away from the tribes. Black Hills, this situation is made even more difficult. In southwestern part of South Dakota, the Black Hills area, it's a sort of a holy site, holy lands for a lot of the tribes that has some special mystical religious significance for them. But the settlers discover there's gold in the Black Hills. All of a sudden you have thousands of miners going into Black Hills gold rush, and they're fighting with the tribes over access to this gold. Of course, the Black Hills Reservation, tribal property, should be going to the tribes, right? Wrong. Federal government sides with the tribes, moves in with the U.S. Army, pushes the tribes aside, lets the miners have access to all the gold and ores in those mountains they can get. And you see this case happening over and over and over again. Water rights, mineral rights, on the reservations stripped away from the tribes get nothing. Back in the 1950s in New Mexico and Arizona, the U.S. government discovered uranium on a lot of these tribal reservations. Naturally occurring uranium. But of course, during the Cold War, the U.S. government needed to make atomic bombs. So what happens? The U.S. government comes in, strip mines the entire region for uranium, and all sorts of toxic chemicals in the ground and the water. What do the tribes get for it? Nothing. There's a lot of health problems, and so they had to take the federal government to court. And really only beginning in the 1970s that the tribes started actually winning these cases over lost mineral rights, stolen lands, and all sorts of other abuses suffered at the hands of the U.S. government. And really it's only been since the 1970s and 1980s that the general American public has even cared. In fact, the Department of the Interior manages billions of dollars in assets of the different tribes from all these court settlements. But of course, once the tribes are on these reservations, the U.S. government sends agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to supervise. Like I said, life on the reservations is very sad. Some of the worst poverty in the United States. Tribes are forced on here. They're broken, beaten. The children are put into reservation schools, but on these reservation schools, they cannot dress in traditional dress. They cannot speak their traditional language. In fact, if they were caught speaking their native language, teachers beat them. What's happening in Canada, the tribes there, a lot of cases they don't have reservation schools. So what they did was they took the children in Canada and sent them to boarding schools back east. Question, did they have permission of the parents to take these children? No. And this is policy into the 1950s in Canada. Huge court cases in Canada still going on for years over this. Basically, the government's kidnapped these children, forced them onto these boarding schools, or stripped them away of their tribal identity and basically anglicized them. Like I said, the federal government in the United States, they had to feed the tribes. Their Indian agents are given a certain amount of money to buy food for the tribes. What they do, and one of these tribal agents did, was they pocketed most of the money and bought them rotten meat. That's the worms, maggots, totally unfit for human consumption. So what happened to a lot of these men stripped away of everything they knew, believed in, worked for their whole lives when they got on those reservations? A lot of them started drinking very heavily. Nothing else. They needed an escape. In fact, the number one cause of death on the reservations for people under 21 on the reservations today, suicide. I'd say spending for schools and education on the reservations. Get a couple numbers here. The fiscal year 1873 to 1874, the U.S. government spent $37,597 on tribal schools. Out of a total budget for Indian Affairs, which included military spending, $4.6 million. That's all they gave him to educate with. Move forward a little bit. After the end of the Plains-Indian Wars, 1881 to 82. It's improved a little bit, but you've got a lot more people on the reservations. $244,200. A total of $4.9 million. School to tell, extraordinarily poor quality. 1894 to 95 improved a little bit, but not by much. $1.96 million out of a total budget just shy of $7 million. $6.36 million. So a lot of tribes, of course, fought to the bitter end of the reservations. We have the Plains Indian Wars being fought between 1867 and 76. It's a series of wars between the U.S. government and different tribes all on the frontier. The fought from the Dakotas to Idaho and Colorado down into Texas. You have massacres of American troops, basically being tricked into ambushes, massacres of settlers, massacres of Native Americans, all back and forth for this time period. How many people died, we really don't know. But slowly, the tribes are being worn down. What's happening is the U.S. Army is cavalry. Cavalry fight the tribes, basically horse-mounted infantry, basically charging into these tribes, basically hit-and-run tactics. Hit as hard as you can, back off. Hard as you can, back off. Of course, the key to cavalry working well is their mobility. In fact, they can move back and forth pretty quickly. In a lot of cases, these tribes are caught completely off guard. They don't have time to mobilize, so they're hit so hard and so fast. So they're slowly worn down. About 1876, the Plains Wars are mostly finished, but you still have one famous last battle to fight, the Battle of Little Bighorn. In which case you have Colonel George Armstrong Custer. Custer, very vainglorious, in self-promotion, supremely arrogant. Custer had a lot of problems. He was, during the Civil War, he was reprimanded several times for his harsh treatment of his troops. A lot of the troops didn't like him because he was very open about his political ambitions. In fact, in 1876, he was hoping to get the nomination for vice president, using his fame as a famed Indian fighter. And of course, the Army culture at that time was troops didn't vote. Troops didn't have political opinions. Basically, you follow the decision of the civilian government, so it should be unseemly for anyone to have a political opinion. But Custer was very open about his. Well, here's what happens, is thousands of tribesmen in the Dakota and the Black Hills Reservation side, they don't like the reservation they're leaving. And of course, any tribes left the reservation, that's considered to be an uprising. The government comes in and slaughters everybody after time and time again. In this case, you have thousands of these tribesmen leaving the reservation hoping to reach Canada, the outside scope of a U.S. government authority. Now, Canadian authorities weren't a lot better about treatment of the tribes, but at least in Canada they had a fighting chance. So the U.S. Army is dispatched, and they're searching over miles and miles of open land trying to find this, where all these tribesmen have gone. Or they don't have Google Earth or satellites or anything like that. They don't have airplanes or anything to search. They basically have just all on horseback. That's a lot of open territory to cover. So Custer, the 7th Army, decides, well, if he can get these all these thousands of tribesmen back onto the reservation, he'll be a hero. So June 1876, he decides, forms his fears. He's going off on his own. He has a few ideas where they could be. But he needs to catch up to them because they have a several-day head start. Now Armstrong, Custer is, of course, offered extra guns, including the new Gatling guns, basically kind of a primitive machine gun, extra men from other units. Custer says no. Here's the thing, when military, if they're going off on a mission, they're offering you extra guns and extra troops, you say yes. Custer doesn't do this. Oh no, he can do it all on his own. Because he knows these tribes that he just shows up, they'll just scatter. So he disconnects his troops from their regular supply lines, basically just riding what they have on their saddles, several days, and then finally they catch up to this escaping group of Native Americans. Well, the train they come across, though, the train of people, not actual physical train, is miles long. Thousands of people. Custer and his troops are numbering about 600 men versus all this. Well, here's what he does, is as he approaches them, he subdivides troops. Sends one man, Captain Denteen, off in one direction to try to find them. And so he comes across them and comes across this ridge where over it he sees the tribe. So Custer charges ahead and he sends his second command, Major Reno, to attack from the south end of it. Custer decides his plan is he's going to attack in the middle. So you got 200 here, 200 here. Custer, he sees Reno fighting, but here's the problem. Tribe started fighting back, and Reno lost his mobility. Basically lost an element of surprise, gets bogged down, basically completely neutralized the advantage of the cavalry. Custer sees Reno struggling, instead of ordering to pull out or going to reinforce him. Custer decides he can go along with his plan. So he and about 189 troops, including his brother, charge into the middle of this group. They end up surrounding and slaughtering them. 200 troops. Reno barely survives. Denteen arrives basically to bail out Reno, but it's probably the single largest victory by Native American tribes against the U.S. Army. It's also the last major battle in the Plains as well. Custer is slaughtered. Probably one of the most notorious defeats in U.S. military history, basically because of arrogance. Actually, he could have ridden in, negotiated with them, said, look, the army's coming, you need to come with me. Could have kept his troops all together, maybe, and fought it out, all as one large unit, but could have taken the advice, taken the extra troops and extra ammunition, but no, look what happens. Pride goeth before a fall. The latest exhibit. But by the end of the year, though, the last of the tribes in this escaping band, though, were forced back onto the reservations, and the Plains Indian Wars were effectively over. The U.S. government said that the policy of the reservations essentially was, in their words, quote, to make white men of them. Strip away their culture and basically make them into Christian family farmers, living just like the rest of the United States. There was one more attempt, though. In 1877, Chief Justice of the Nez Perce tribe led his people on a daring voyage attempt to reach the safety of Canada. For 75 days, his tribe managed to avoid military patrols searching for them. They traveled 1,300 miles, winding through narrow mountain passes of the Upper Rockies. But running out of food, they were forced to surrender just shy of the Canadian border. They're forced on reservations in the Indian Territory. Remember, up here in Idaho at this point, they're forcing them all the way thousands of miles south into Oklahoma. Many of them died of disease and exposure along the way. 1890. This is the battle came to be called the Battle of Wounded Knee. One last story for it. In 1890, the Teton Sioux of South Dakota are hungry and desperate, walked into the reservation, began turning to new religion for inspiration. It's a Paiute prophet named Wovoka started talking about this new religion called the Ghost Dance religion. It's a combination of different tribal, cultural beliefs. But basically, his belief was that they performed these ritual dances over and over again, ritual chants, ritual dances, that eventually this new golden age for the Native American tribes would dawn. That is, the white man would disappear, the reservations would end, buffalo would return, and the Native American tribes would all live together as brothers. Basically, all their problems would be over. They performed these ghost dances. Well, for the Teton Sioux, sounded good enough for them. Again, performing these dances, but the Army grew concerned, though, about all this, particularly as it's growing in South Dakota at the Black Hills Reservation. And they rushed to the scene to try to bring the situation under control, finally arriving at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. Well, it's December 1890. Temperature is hovering near zero, snow on the ground. And all you have here basically are unarmed people, because you can't have weapons on the reservation, except women, young children, old men. Basically, no one really fit to fight. It's middle of winter. And so what happens is the Army surrounds this group, and they start performing the ghost dance. The tribes start performing the ghost dances. The U.S. Army opens fire on them, killing 300 people. That is the Battle of Wounded Knee. Came to be the last major act of violence, major massacre on the frontier, but basically it sums up the era of what was happening when nothing else could. By 1900, about 250,000 Native Americans left from an estimated 5 million in 1492. In that case, good.